Hello and welcome to the Canine Rehab Movement Podcast, where we discuss all things canine rehab, fitness, and sports medicine for our four-legged companions. We cover a variety of topics with amazing guests in an educational and entertaining format. Some would even call it edutainment. Now, we are all about canine rehab and fitness training, or craft. So join us and hone your craft with the Canine Rehab Movement Podcast. Now, this episode is sponsored by H2O for Fitness, the industry leader for companion animal underwater treadmills. Since 2011, H2O has been offering aquatic therapy with the Oasis product line, enhancing the physical rehabilitation and fitness of small animals worldwide. With innovative design and reliability, Oasis underwater treadmills take hydrotherapy to the next level, ensuring successful outcomes for your pet patients and practice. So go to h2oforfitness.com for more information. Today we are with Kirsty Oliver, one of the CCAT instructors at Northeast Seminars. Kirsty is an English-trained veterinary nurse with an advanced diploma in surgical nursing. It was her keen interest in this field that brought her to the U.S. in the year 2000 to join a surgical specialty hospital. She received her certification in canine rehab in the year of 2005 and obtained her CVPP through the IVAPM in the year of 2010. With a love deeply rooted in patient care, pain management, and rehab, Kirsty worked towards her vet tech specialty in physical rehabilitation and passed the exam in 2018. Kirsty enjoys all aspects of physical rehab, but holds a keen interest in hydrotherapy and biomechanics. When she is not at work, Kirsty spends time with her husband and two cats, Dennis and Rock. Now, both cats have special needs and require daily rehab. Being British through and through, Kirsty likes tea, Brit TV, and driving her Mini. So, Kirsty, thanks so much for coming on. I'm super excited to interview you about hydrotherapy and how you incorporate it in the CCAT program at Northeast Seminars. If you could tell our listeners the basic of hydrotherapy, maybe even some advancements and applications, things like that.
Thanks so much for having me on. I'm absolutely chuffed to pieces to be part of this. So yeah,
Of
no,
course.
hydrotherapy is my jam. I absolutely love it. I think it's really easy to understand water therapy. Hydrotherapy is just water therapy. There are so many different versions of that. So you step into your shower in the
Yeah.
morning, hydrotherapy, because you've got the warm water splashing down on you.
Right.
As in a veterinary setting, you're looking at underwater treadmill as opposed to pool. So I think it's really
Mhm.
important with the upswing of the interest in physical rehabilitation in the veterinary world at the moment, understanding that underwater treadmill is not just to be placed in a practice and then you bring dogs in and run them on the treadmill. But you're not going to get your investment return back on that. You have to, it's really important to understand what happens to a dog when you put it in a volumetric amount of water and all of the forces and things that
Mhm.
affect that dog, the state of the dog, like its health and everything else. So we'll jump into that in a sec because I've got some fantastic notes written down. But he's been around for thousands of years. Being from the UK, we have a very famous city called Bath. And the Romans found that the mineral content within some of the water within Bath was very therapeutic. So they built these big
Mhm.
Roman bathhouses that were heated under the floor. And a few of those actually survive today because they found that immersing themselves in warm water, you've got a volumetric amount of water in a set amount of space. And Roman foot soldiers, you can imagine being in the veterinary field, we're on our feet all day. Can you imagine a Roman soldier like slipping into a bathtub and just being like, "Ooh." Exactly. Not to mention the stench of Roman sandals, but we won't go into that.
Mm.
But, you
Oh,
know,
yeah, no.
water therapy, water has been around since the dawn of time, and animals use it in the wild as well. You've got Arctic monkeys that use these hot springs, these sulfur hot springs. So that's natural heated water.
Yes.
Smart monkeys covered in snow sitting in a whirlpool. Smart monkey.
Seriously.
So water therapy as a whole has been around for a very long time. It's not, I think it's become more of a buzzword within the last sort of 20 years with the addition of physical rehabilitation in the veterinary field. It's you really need to understand, you're going to put a pool in, you're going to put a treadmill in. We can get into the aspects of those as we go along. But I think whether
Oh,
you
yeah.
look at pool or treadmill, you have to understand the properties of water. So sciencey nerdy bit coming up,
Mhm.
so watch out. So we've got principles of
Yeah.
water. It's not just a case of shoving a dog in a treadmill and having somebody just run it on, or taking your dog to a swimming pool and just putting it in a swimming pool. If they've got certain health issues, it's going to affect how they interact with that water. But you've got the basic
Absolutely.
principles of water come down to buoyancy, hydrostatic pressure, viscosity and resistance, surface tension, and what we call relative density or like specific gravity. And all of those,
Yeah.
I wish I'd paid more attention in class when I did physics, because this portion of understanding water is really important, and understanding your patient, because how much they weigh, their coat color, or not their coat color, but their coat length, whether or
Mhm.
not they're muscular, skinny, fat, or furry, if they've got
Yeah.
any comorbidities, cardiac disease, heart issues, respiratory issues, brachycephalic, whether they're tall, long, short, tiny, every single patient that we put, whether cats or dogs or horses, no thank you, but they're as individual as we are. And every
Yeah.
single patient that we put in the underwater treadmill has a different effect on the water. But the principles remain
Absolutely.
the same. Archimedes, old guy, way back when, very smart. I don't know how he determined buoyancy. I'm sure that he just pushed a bunch of people into a pool to see if they floated. Who the heck
Yeah.
knows? But he came up that an object immersed in fluid expresses a buoyant force within the magnitude. Let's redo that. Let's redo that. Yeah.
Trust.
Archimedes' principle is buoyancy. If you put, say we're going to put our dog in the treadmill, we have a 100-pound dog, let's just say. So if we fill the
Mhm.
water level up to the level of the hock, they've got 91% of their weight is still weight bearing. So we've only lost about 8 or
Yeah.
9% of weight bearing. You fill that
Mhm.
up to the level of the greater
Mhm.
trochanter, like just by the stifle, but the tibial
Yeah.
tuberosity, 85%. So you're like, okay, we're losing some weight, but you left it up to the
Yeah.
level of the greater trochanter in the hip, and it goes down to 38%. So if you're a 100-pound dog
Yeah.
that's slightly overweight with multiple joint arthritis, you can basically make it the size of a small cocker spaniel by putting it in the water. So
Yeah.
you're
Which is
alleviating. Yeah, it
it's
is huge.
huge.
You're
Yeah.
alleviating the pressure on the joints. Now we know with weight bearing,
Yeah.
60% in the front, 40% in the back. So if we look at the percentage of weight lifted off from hind legs, it goes down when you look at that 60-40 ratio,
Mhm.
36% all the way up to 29% elevation off of the back end with a 40% load. So you're effectively relieving half of the body weight on hips, stifles, and ankles, and pretty much the same in the
Mhm.
front. But you have to remember that as the water goes up, weight shifting goes forward. So you'll tend to
Yes.
see like hind end, they start to float before they start to walk. Anything with forelimb issues, especially like heavy osteoarthritis in the elbows or the shoulders, you need to be really careful. So that's just something to have in
Mhm.
mind.
Yeah, no, that's a good tidbit.
Hydrostatic pressure. So Pascal, another smart guy. You stick something
Yeah.
in water, in a volumetric amount of water in a volumetric space, there are so many pounds per square inch of pressure pushing in on that body, which is great because it's
Mhm.
supportive. But anything with like cardiac and respiratory issues, they're going to have a decreased ability to breathe and shunt that blood around. So we need to be really careful with that.
Mhm.
So viscosity and resistance. Water is 1.5 times stickier than air molecules. If you wave your hand through the
Mhm.
air, your hand
Okay.
does the whole, you can move it through, but you,
Like you
yeah,
do self-care, right?
absolutely. Get those glow sticks out, get the lighters out. So you put your hands through water and you can feel the resistance in your fingers is because the water molecules are
Yeah.
stickier, they're more cohesive. So we have to take that into effect when we put dogs in water and cats in water. And again, horses, but no thank you. So it's been horses scare the living Jesus out of me.
I
I'm
love it.
sorry, they really do. They frighten the nut out of me. So
Well, they are intimidating. I'm not going to lie.
I'm not a
So
big
don't worry
horsey
about
person. We
it.
have to, that kind of resistance comes down to that cohesion between all the molecules within the liquid. So things that disturb that, walking. So if you stand on water and you
Yeah.
keep everything nice and quiet, you see the surface tension of the water is nice and straight. But then we ask these dogs
Yeah.
and cats to move in the water. So that's going to create
Oh, yeah.
turbulence. Water doesn't stay in a flat state when something is walking through it.
No.
So you're going to increase the turbulence and you
Absolutely.
increase the resistance. And then the water workout gets harder. So you add that to a nice long hair coat. So yeah,
Oh,
we all see seaweed waving in the air, but it's drag, it's added resistance. It's like adding
yeah.
leg weights to someone who's trying to run a marathon. All of a sudden, we've taken underwater treadmill to a whole new level by sticking a dog that has long hair, bad joints, and is probably overweight. We've changed the dynamic
Yeah.
of that workout significantly based on the patient. And then you've got relative density, and that's specific gravity. We all know fat floats. Yep.
Oh, yeah.
So
That's what
I
keeps
don't
us out. That's for sure. I mean,
absolutely.
that's what kind of keeps us
Sometimes
out. Our muscles will sink
exactly.
us.
Fat
Yeah.
has a higher specific gravity than water. So whereas lean muscle has less specific gravity, so fluffy pets tend to float better. So sometimes being slightly
Yeah.
overweight, even though it's a dead disaster on land, they do better in the treadmill. We see a lot
Yeah.
of people. Water aerobics it still is a really big thing for the
Oh, yeah.
elderly and obviously for people that are overweight. It's a nice way to loosen up joints and get them moving. But we do have to
Mhm.
be really careful that these stocky pitties that are all muscle are going to sink like breeze blocks. So
Oh,
it's
yeah.
harder for them
Oh, yeah.
when they're walking on the treadmill because they're not as able to keep themselves afloat. So we need to be really careful when we choose pool over treadmill that we're looking at how these
Mhm.
pets and how these patients are actually made up. The use of float coats and life vests and harnesses, that you don't want to just push a pitty into the water and think it's going to swim. It's going to have to work so hard to keep itself above the water,
Yeah.
and then they usually fatigue, sink, and then there's all sorts of problems.
Yeah, I was going to say, we don't want to use the sink or swim
Absolutely
principle,
not.
right?
No, Archimedes, we need to have a chat with Archimedes and be like, stop pushing big people into the
Right.
treadmill.
I was going to say, I think he started that
Didn't
sink or
he?
swim
It's basically
protocol.
Archimedes' principle is buoyancy. So I think he was like, yeah, let's see if you're going
Right.
to sink or swim. Whomp. And in you go.
Yep.
I wonder how many like lean people would, oh my God, this is not fun. And then you've got the slightly fluffy
Send
people
help.
that are bobbing around being like, hey, this isn't so bad. This is
This is nice. Yeah.
So there is an awful lot. There is an awful lot to think about when we talk about hydrotherapy. There really is. We have to be super careful. Any
Yeah.
comorbidities, heart disease, respiratory issues, no wounds, no
Yeah.
sutures,
Yeah.
no diarrhea. Mm-mm.
Yeah. Doesn't work
No,
well.
no UTIs.
Really blends in.
Literally,
Blends
you
in.
you do not, and never underestimate the power of warm water because obviously temperature plays a large role in
Oh,
this.
yeah.
You don't want to plunge anything to cold water because you're going to get that vasoconstriction. You don't want to have hot water
Oh, yeah.
because you're going to. Hot yoga, what do we do with hot yoga? We sweat and it gets a lot harder.
Yeah.
Regulating the temperature in your pool or your treadmill is really important.
Mhm.
But yes, warm
Absolutely.
water and an old dog that can't squat to poop, never underestimate what might come out. So be prepared.
Oh, yeah. Always be prepared. Even in my facility, we always tell them or ask them, have you walked?
Yes.
Did they toilet?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, we'll just do a
Yes.
lap around our lawn
Lee.
just for argument's sake. And yeah, even when we're in there, there's always a
Yep.
chance.
The
Even if they
inevitable
went,
code
there's
round.
always that
Yep.
chance.
Not fun.
Not fun.
And
Not
waders are
fun.
your best friend.
Yes, it's true. I've never looked so good
I
at
know,
waders in my life
everyone.
since I've
Yep,
started
I
Canine
think we
Rehab.
should charge everybody at least $1 to say, "How are you going fishing?" And I'm like, "Yep, put it in the pot." I just don't want poop
Seriously.
between my toes if it happens. I had
It's
that
true.
once. I had it
Absolutely.
once. It was an overweight golden retriever, bless her heart.
Yeah.
And it was as I was a newbie to rehab. We'd just got on our treadmills. I had my little wetsuit on. Never again. Never. Never
It's
again.
the, especially as a newbie, this is
Yes,
how we learn
absolutely.
situation.
Absolutely.
Sometimes this is how we learn.
Yes.
Waders from
Yes.
now on.
Closed up boots. Thank you so much.
Oh man. But yeah, you brought up so many good points too. And a lot of times I do this education with my
Mm.
pet parents, but even when I do lunch and learns too, I think it's really good for the veterinary staff to know that, but yeah, underwater treadmill's great. It's fun. It
Mm,
looks
mm.
fun. The animals are having fun for the most part, but there's so much
There's
science
so
behind
much
it, right? I don't go as deep as meetings and everything, but I do go over a quick revamp of the hydrostatic
Mhm.
pressure, the viscosity of the water, things like that. And I think it brings a newfound information to them where they get an aha moment of, oh, wow, this could help my
Mhm.
patient. And this, oh, that does that. This is really good because my patient can benefit from that. I truly do think it's so good to know the science behind it and not just the fun
Yeah.
behind it. It is and can be a lot of fun, but yeah, there's so much happening when you see a video of a dog in that
Mhm.
underwater treadmill. I think somebody should start putting little pot bubbles on
Yeah.
what's really happening
Yeah.
scientifically on that Instagram
Yeah.
reel. Maybe I'll talk to my
We
doctor.
should. I think it would be, we lecture so
Yeah.
heavily that I think it would be really good to, it's easy when you're lecturing in person and you're saying, "Hey, I've got a great lecture on hydrotherapy with orthopedic and neurologic patients." And you're like, "Hey, this is why we're using this speed, but do you notice this?" And you can see people leaning forward and they're
Yeah.
trying to find it. And I think that's a really good idea, is creating like an interactive video that sees,
Kind of yeah,
yeah.
pot bubble
And we also
situation.
have to
Yeah.
think about the size of the pet. But how
Absolutely.
high and how long they are is the difference between car length. It's easier to maneuver a smaller
Yeah.
car than it is to like a stretch limo. We've got to look at the taller and longer they are, the higher speed that they need just to get into a normal gait pattern. But you put like
Totally.
a long-legged American lab in a treadmill and you start them at point 4 and they're going to have trouble walking. But to a Yorkshire
Yeah.
Terrier, it'd be like running a marathon. So you have to, yeah.
Yeah, no,
Sun patterns
it's
too,
so
I think
different.
is really important too.
Absolutely. And I do think too, especially I think you would agree that most of our patients could always use core
Oh,
strengthening,
yes.
right? So when they're put in the underwater treadmill too, even if the water
Mhm.
is high, especially if the water is high and they still are wobbly because their core strength
Mhm.
isn't there, they are now creating their
Ye
own turbulence, like you said, or
Mhm.
waves now, right? So now it's making it
Yep,
even harder for that pet to walk in
yep,
that water. So you really have to keep in mind of how high, how fast you're going, especially when you start to see those
mhm.
waves, because now you're really going to
Yep.
tire that dog out 50% more than what
Yeah,
you were looking
especially if
to
they
do.
have that
Yeah.
pacing gait, like the left side, right side, then you start to
Yeah.
see
Yep.
like the side to side slosh is not what you wanna see. They
Yeah.
start to get a bit of a boogie on and you get that speed up, and I towards the end of rehab, I try and trot some of my cases just to see, it's like my test to graduate is, can you trot in the treadmill? Because if you can trot in the treadmill, then I'm done with you. But you'll
Right.
see like that
You
water
know,
starting to go and you're like, "This is the added resistance that we were talking about." So it's fluid dynamics is so important when we talk about putting things into treadmills and pools.
for
So,
sure. Ab- Absolutely. And I think that's another good point too about telling whether it's the therapist or even the pet parent, reminding them of when you walk into a shallow end of a pool,
mhm.
right? And you're like, hold on,
Yes.
I'll get there. Even trying to move fast
Yep.
through it,
Yep.
it's tough. And that you have that same thing, that same feeling going through an animal that's actually doing it at their
Yep.
shoulder
Mhm.
level, right? Yes, their weight bearing is different and they're on all four limbs. They're doing it at almost shoulder to
Mm.
neck level at some points. And that can be very
Very
tough,
tough.
especially at 2 miles per
Mhm.
hour or anything like that, or even
Yep.
1 mile per hour.
So
So,
speed, size,
but
length of time, don't work them to exhaustion. It's okay to do
Yeah.
sets. And when we acclimate a lot of our patients, we're only doing 2-minute sets with a minute or two set breather in between. I need to look. Sometimes I'm behind them because we always get in with our firsters. So anybody that's in the treadmill for the first time, I'm always in there. If there's anybody that starts to huff and puff, I'm right there to check pulse rate. I always like to check, especially on any of my old cases, any geriatric, any post-op, anybody that, like you say,
Yeah.
weak core usually means that they like got a weak cardiovascular resistance. So it's like running a marathon and then sitting on the
Totally.
couch for a
Yeah.
month. You don't go back to running a marathon. You have to build up that cardiac resistance as well. So cardiac output is
Yeah.
also going to be really important. So anybody that I'm worried about, I will take a baseline heart rate, just a femoral pulse. I'll just do a couple of mental counts, make a note, and then
Mm.
midway through, I'm gonna take another count. If it's gone up more than 25 or 50%, then that's it, we're done. And it may only be 4
Yeah.
minutes. Taking everything into account
Yeah.
like that is so important, and watching the patient. You've got to watch. I don't wanna see people on their phones or nitter-nattering to themselves.
Oh,
Drives me
God.
up the
No,
wall.
of
I'm like,
course
"Your
not.
focus is nothing except what's in
Yeah.
that treadmill right now." So, if your eyes aren't on the patient, then
Yeah. And outside all of the parameters you
Mhm.
just said, now you also have to think of the psychological part of the
Mhm.
patient, right? Some dogs are very gung ho, or pets in general, because we also
Mhm.
see cats. And ironically, we get cats in the
Yeah, me
underwater
too. I did
treadmill.
one last week.
It's quite an experience, as do we. Sometimes we need welder's gloves, sometimes we don't. So,
Yeah, cats can be interesting. I had my boss does hip replacements, and she did a micro hip replacement on a
mm,
snowshoe, which is a long
okay.
head like a ragdoll cat.
Very interesting.
Capital
Yeah.
physeal fracture. They have because of their
Wow.
size, their femoral heads are weak. So she put a
Oh,
micro
yeah.
hip in. And it's the only cat that I've seen so far, I'm not saying ever, that walked on the treadmill like a dog
Yeah.
and she eats peanut butter. Yep,
That's
and I have a
amazing.
video. I have a Yeah.
Teach me your ways.
You can be my
Uh,
Padawan, you can be my water Padawan.
yeah. We have some other apparatuses. We've never had a cat walk like a dog and go for the
Mm,
peanut butter. We see mostly neuro
mm,
on our side. We don't get a lot of ortho patients when it comes to felines. So we see mostly neuro.
mhm,
FCE is the highest. And a lot of times we actually do wind up having them try to swim a little bit too in our
mhm,
underwater treadmill, which I'm actually going to segue
mm,
into in a second. But we also have a sling and harness system and it's a really small little sling that we're actually able to put them in. And it does help us, even with dogs too, it does help us, especially with neuro,
yeah,
facilitate walking them without having to hold
yeah.
them
I think
or to
I
one
think if
side
you're
or the
gonna do
other.
neuro,
So,
you've got to have it like some sort of suspensory system. You bring up a great point.
yeah, you need
Yeah,
both
you
hands.
do. And we see it's never the tiny dachshunds that we get. It's always the
No.
120-pound ventral slot that can't get up at all, doesn't want to get up.
Yeah.
And then you've got to body haul it into the treadmill.
Yeah,
But getting that neuro case in the water, you can utilize all of those physics that we've been over, like buoyancy and all of
absolutely.
that, and
Yeah,
have them stand. We've got jets in our
yeah,
treadmill that provides not only like agitation of the water, which also can increase resistance, but it can increase proprioception.
mhm,
We've got little
yeah,
proprioceptive mechanisms in our skin, in our muscles, and sometimes just circulating the water with those cases can help improve any little thing that's trying to get through that spinal cord, increase
yeah,
proprioception, not to mention the benefits on the chest so they don't get dependent edema in their lungs, and just being
mhm,
upright and then being able to do like
yeah,
gaze patterning
it's
and stuff.
huge.
So there are so many things that hydrotherapy is useful for, but I love it.
Yeah, it's huge. And I'm a fan of the underwater treadmill, and I'm not naysaying the pool whatsoever. Just coming from a PT background, I'm very into, and also I've done aquatic therapy in the
Mm,
human world too. So I've had a lot of fun with pool and treadmills alike. But for me, I really like that somatosensory skill
mhm.
for the animal. Like I like that placement of the
Yeah.
limb, what they could be feeling, things like that. But for the most part too, if it is a front limb injury, the treadmill's dynamic enough where you can still feel it high enough, depending on the size of the animal,
Mhm.
obviously. and you can still facilitate some sort of swimming. I'm not saying it's a replacement for a pool,
Yeah.
but it's definitely a good attempt at it. And you can swim them back and forth and really, especially for something like elbow dysplasia, things like that, it's really
Yeah,
super
I've done a
helpful.
lot of
Yeah.
amputees with this, what we call a static swim. So you've got a life vest
Yeah,
on, you fill it
exactly.
up, and you just hold. Because especially if it's a
Uh-huh.
full limb amputation, the gait
Mhm.
dynamic changes of losing 30% weight bearing limb is catastrophic on
Yeah.
the other leg. So you don't see enough shoulder
Yeah.
carpus and elbow range of motion. So getting that out of them with swimming can be super helpful. But we
Yeah,
do.
I agree. I've seen some amputees, especially going into
Yes,
hyperextension. So
absolutely.
getting them to doggy paddle
Yeah,
with that one limb is just getting that
yeah.
flexion back or trying to get that flexion
Not
back
to
is huge.
mention all
Yeah.
of the center of gravity change, your chronic
Oh, yeah.
postural changes. I know myofascial stuff,
Yeah.
you'll be talking to Michelle about that soon. For me, body mechanics, joint kinematics, and like the physicals of
Oh, yeah.
like body biomechanics. You don't have good body mechanics. You can do all the rehab in the world and you're not going to get everything straight. You
Of
have to
course.
fix all that
Yeah.
first.
Mhm.
Hydrotherapy is great, but it's not rehab alone. But you can't just put
I
a
agree.
treadmill or a
I
pool in
agree.
your practice and say, "We have rehab," because you don't. There
No.
are some cases that don't get into into the treadmills that we have at work until they're 3 or 4 sessions
Mhm.
into rehab because you've got there's so many other things that you have to fix at that time, pain and range of motion and trigger points and myofascial tightening and all that lot, but it's a great tool, and it's a tool in the toolbox of your
Correct.
rehab
Yeah.
practitioner, and it's up to them to determine which tool they take out to help treat that pet.
Totally. You got it right.
No,
Every case is
every
different.
case is different,
So
and if
yeah.
anybody takes anything away from this, please, just like us, we are individuals, your patient is an individual. Their needs, they may be the same surgery, it may be the same condition, but the patient is different. Don't put the cart before the horse.
Absolutely.
Look at your patient.
No.
Look at your patient. So important.
No, it's true. I agree because there's
Yeah.
so many
Mhm.
variables and you really need to make sure the pet is ready both physically and
Mm.
psychologically. I have some rescues that excuse me, I have some rescues that I deal with that again, we don't touch
No.
the underwater treadmill yet. Like we're just working on your baseline rehab
Yeah.
acclimation because even just acclimation for the dog could take a
Yeah.
few sessions. So if you're throwing everything at that
Overload.
animal, it's not a
Mhm.
positive experience, right? Because that's the other mindset you need
Yeah.
to have as
You
well,
have to take
right?
their psyche into
And
account. So
yeah.
everybody in our rehab practice on my side is fear-free. And we take that extra time we had a case it was a dog that was found in a crack house or a meth lab in Baltimore, and he was like chained to the
Oh,
door because he was a guard dog
wow.
and he didn't trust anybody. He was found, he was rescued because when they moved out, they just left him. And a wonderful couple took him and he didn't trust anybody. And it was like 6 sessions into his rehab and just getting his hips were atrocious. His Both of his cruciates had been chronically torn. Getting
Right.
him acclimated to the treadmill, I'd have the owner just call me on a lunchtime and he'd say, "I'm bringing Dougal in." And he'd come in, we'd put a little like thing of peanut butter on the door and he'd come in, he'd walk up the ramp,
Yeah.
lick the peanut butter off the door and then leave. And we
Okay.
gradually
That's a
and
start.
just getting him in, and we managed to get him in, and then we'd close the door, and then we'd get him out, and then we'd put water in it. And before we knew
Yeah.
it, we had him in the treadmill, walking in the treadmill and going back to living his best life. So you have to take the time to know what those pets' triggers are and how are
Absolutely.
you going to incorporate not scaring the living doodah out of them by introducing them to, because
Yeah.
we do is noisy, it's hands-on, water filling, place of the treadmill,
Yeah.
keeping your tanks
I
behind
would,
a door or something so it doesn't make a good, pre-filling your
yeah.
treadmill before your scaredy cat case gets in, so they don't get that whoosh,
Exactly.
and we
Yeah.
have to remember that all those sounds are amplified when you're in the treadmill.
Yeah,
Barking.
and also when it's something
Yep.
new and you're not sure of things, your
Yep.
senses are heightened.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's all amplified, and yeah, those are some of the scenarios I had to do as well, just walking in and out of the
Mhm.
treadmill. even actually filling the treadmill while the dog was
Yeah.
outside of the treadmill, getting
Noise.
used to the
Yeah.
noises in
Mm-hmm.
general, right? Yeah, that was really good starts. And then, yeah, like you said, eventually the dog will start walking. And then all of a sudden now it has
Yeah.
a toy in its mouth.
Yeah.
And now it's actually, now it's running towards the
Yeah.
treadmill, right? Oh my God, this is fun. And it's a really cool sight of the
Yeah.
evolution of that
Yeah.
acclimation for sure. But yeah, that actually helps to segue into kind of the next topic of let's talk about techniques and their applications. Obviously, there's a whole lot out there depending on the conditions, things
Mm-hmm.
like that. And I brought up a technique of obviously either walking in the treadmill or using it as like a mini pool. But yeah, for our listeners out there, if you can get into a little bit more in depth for us.
Yeah. It's again, you go back to making sure that you're personalizing your treatments. That is number one key is not every TPLO is going to be every TPLO and not every IVDD is going to be IVDD.
Correct.
I had a case that it was a dog that had a brain tumor and it was relatively slow going. So owner had noticed that he was having some movement dysfunction. So we decided that we would start to incorporate some basic proprioceptive techniques just to remind him where his feet are in relation to
Mhm.
space. And he was very weak. So we did all of his land exercises in the treadmill. We utilized the buoyancy coefficient in the treadmill to be able to support him. We did pause up. We managed to do pause up I got a litter box. You fill the litter box and dump it. And then we got some leg weights and weighed it
Okay.
down with the leg weights so that he could step up and step
Cool.
down and step up and step
Yeah.
down. We can do weight shifting. You can
Yeah.
if you want to get really tricky, walking backwards is a very good hind limb exercise. But you can, if
Absolutely.
you've got a treadmill that can be reversed, then you can have
Mhm.
them walking backwards in the treadmill nice and slowly. It's more of an advanced technique. Yeah,
I would
it's
agree.
not the easiest.
I- I've
I
tried
have
it.
a
That's why.
couple. I've got a doozy. I had an Italian Spinone that used to do it, and he's
Yeah.
so cool. He's just like this. I'll walk it backwards, and but it's
Yeah, I would say the approach is interesting because sometimes it's hard enough to get them to
yeah.
walk forward. So when you're going backwards, yeah, the whole
Yeah, you can get a
yeah.
little bit creative depending on the size of the pet. You can do like sidestepping. You could turn the animal sideways and you
Yeah.
can have them do sidestepping as well. There's lots of different techniques you can use. You can add water wings to make the limb more buoyant. So they have to walk harder to
Mhm.
push the leg to the floor, building muscle. So
Yeah.
there's lots of things that you can do within the treadmill that will depending on what you're looking for, your goal and your patient. So you
Yeah.
can get quite creative. Pool
Yeah.
noodles are the best things. Can I just say?
I,
We
the
have
absolute best. We have
Yeah,
them as
do you
well. Yeah.
use them? Like, you can use them for chest support, you can use them for abdominal support. I like to, especially with my
Yeah.
little neuro guys, especially if they've got hemiplegia or if they're cervical disc, then I'll vet wrap them either side of the life vest.
Yeah, we have, I'm going to describe this the best way I can, but we have mini
Mhm,
pool noodles and a little kind of a chain
mhm.
or rope that goes in them. And we also attach that to our
Yep.
harness system as well sometimes. And that's a really good way to
Mhm,
help the animal as well, besides our regular pool noodles. But yes, it can go under the
mhm.
hips or under the chest or things like that, which is really cool. A lot of the stuff with, like you said, being creative, I think about the human world and what we do in aquatic therapy, and a lot of
Mm,
dumbbells are made out of the styrofoam as well and stuff like that. But yes, there's like styrofoam wraps you could put on
mhm,
limbs as well, which is really fun because yes, like you said, it causes a whole different
mhm.
dynamic for the dog with either resistance and trying to place down more. So I think not many people know about that with hydrotherapy, that you can do
Yeah.
so much and be so creative.
You have to know what you're doing and be
And
careful.
correct. Yeah.
Safe
Safety first,
first always,
always.
yes.
Safety. And it's so funny. I tell my therapist at my facility, if you're going to give a patient something, you have
Yeah,
to try it first.
absolutely. But you've
You
got
got
to
to
know
know what
what
the
the patient's
patient's going to
feeling.
go.
I've been shockwave, lasered, e-stim, tensed. I know what it's like to be in the
Yeah.
treadmill. And
all at the same
yeah,
time.
I do. You have your students come along. I think that's
Sensory
but that's the
overload.
great thing about the labs with the CCAT program as well, is you get to try all these things. But yes, we have all these
Yeah.
wonderful patients that come through with our hands-on labs with the CCAT program. The
Mhm.
first thing that we do with any of them is we treat each other. Yeah, so you have to know how it feels so that what not to do, what to look for. We can
Yeah.
say, ouch, that hurts. Get off. Don't do that. Oh, no. But sometimes the subtlety in our patients, like looking for that side eye, looking for like changes in ear position, especially in the treadmill, as they start to fatigue, everyone thinks they start panting first, and they don't.
There's so
So
many
many
tells. Yeah.
tells,
There's
stride length, riding the belt back, trying to outwalk the belt because they're just like, I'm so exhausted. Eyes may dilate, ears go up,
Yeah.
down, the tail maybe start to move a little bit more lateral movement in the treadmill. So you have to watch all of those little secret signs that they're trying to say, yo,
Yeah.
I'm not coping, stop.
I know. I agree. Not to be confused with the lazy.
Yes, not to be,
But,
yes,
you
the
know.
lazy ones. Yeah, it's funny because you bring that up. Sometimes using food in the treadmill is such a big thing. And I really do try with my
Mhm.
patients and my owners and the staff that we have around us to not use food as a lure, use it as a reward
Yeah.
because they soon will
Yeah.
notice that they're like, "Ooh, get the treat." And then back they go. And then they're like, see
Yeah.
why they need to change your speed,
Exactly.
which then tends to send them back to the treadmill. Be like, come on, come and get the treat. Do some walking. That's great. That's great. Here's your treat.
Yeah.
Because they're very
Yeah.
smart. Patients are very smart and they'll do the bare minimum just to get what they
Oh,
need.
of course.
But yes, and don't
Exactly.
confuse
Yeah.
laziness for exhaustion and vice versa.
It's true. It's true. Oh man. Kirsty, let's talk about like how you would integrate hydrotherapy into a comprehensive rehab plan and how, you know,
Exactly. So many people come into the practice because the way our practice is set up is we call it's the fishbowl window. We have a big glass window, and people who come in to see
yeah.
surgery see the dogs in the treadmill. It's half frosted so that the dogs can't see each other because there's nothing worse than having a alligator like trotting in the treadmill and then all of a sudden it's so we do
Yeah,
have everything's
exactly.
frosted so the dogs can't see each other. It's great
Okay.
for us because people can see what we're doing, they can see and then they question, they say, "Hey, can my
Mm,
pet do that?" But it's
yeah.
yeah,
Little window
exactly.
shopping there.
But don't be thinking that your patient will be doing that. It's there are lots of
Mhm.
cases that we
Yeah.
can't put in the treadmill. There's a lot of things like if they have a lot of seizures and stress, not good idea. Cardiac
Oh
disease,
yeah.
no. If they have any kind of cardiac disease, I will send them to their cardiologist to be cleared. And thankfully, the
Mhm.
cardiology group that we work with is aware that of what we do. And I think that's the
Yeah.
bonus of being inclusive with the veterinary community is other specialties want to
Absolutely.
learn about what you're doing because it affects their patients too. Reaching
It's true.
out, not
Yeah.
just to general practitioners, but going to specialty hospitals and saying, hey, rehab's great, but we don't want to break your patients. So have a
Mhm.
conversation, pick up that phone and say, hey, I've got Fluffy Smith here who's got a 4 out of 5 or a 4 out of 6 heart murmur. Do you want me to put it in the treadmill? The answer is probably
Right.
going to be no. So anything
Yes.
that decreases like oxygen output, so chronic bronchitis,
Mhm.
brachycephalics. Oh my God, please be careful with brachycephalic breeds. Anything that
Yes.
has its nasal cavity shoved up behind its brain, really, you need to be really careful with them as well. But yes, it's all it is. It's not the be all and end all of rehab. It's just another tool, just like your set of spanners and your wrenches and your socket sets. It's what tool are you going
Yeah.
to be able to utilize to achieve your client and patient goals? And treadmill might not be one of them.
Absolutely. And I at my facility, we are charged by time,
Hmm.
not by what we do. There's no a
Yep.
la carte. There's no dollar menu or anything.
Absolutely.
We are there to treat your patient for X
Hmm.
amount of minutes, and we are going to utilize everything in our power. But that doesn't necessarily mean that patient is a
Yep.
candidate for everything
Absolutely.
in our power. So, yeah, we have that discussion right away. And for the most part, most of our patients can go into the underwater treadmill. But there are discussions out there, especially with acclimation, things like that. But yeah, if we get a post-op and there's still
Hmm.
stitches and it looks like there's maybe possibility of a little bit of an
Hmm.
open wound or still just
Hmm.
hasn't fully healed yet, or the slightest scabbing, we don't
No,
want to mess with it.
absolutely.
It's things like that. And then sometimes you have cases where it could be a situation that it's just not right
Mhm.
for the dog
Mm.
in general, whether it's physical
Yep.
or behavioral, psychological, those kind of things. Yeah, I think that's very important for all practitioners out there to really think of engage. Obviously, you can always set up your price points how you want to set up your
Mhm.
price points, but I think it's huge just for no matter how you do that setup is education upfront to the pet
Absolutely.
parent, letting them know that it's not just, yeah, we hop in the treadmill, we do the laser, we
Yeah.
do the shockwave, we do the hands-on, this and that. This is what your
Yeah.
pet needs at this particular phase. And then in the next phase, we might be
Yeah.
going into the
And that's where
underwater
it
treadmill.
comes.
I think
It
that's
is, and
super important.
that's the difference between a tailored rehab program and a cookie cutter. And you
Yeah.
you have to remember that that every time you see that patient, you have them for a very small snapshot of time, and you have to
Mhm.
treat them in the moment. And we see so many, and we're like, "Yeah, had a good week, blah blah blah. Here's my plan. We'll plan to put them in the acclimate them to the treadmill next week." And they come in and they fell off the couch. My plan's changed. That little snapshot of treatment time that you have them for, you utilize your toolkit for that snapshot of time. And you may have all these grandiose plans and everything mapped out, but pet's got other ideas. So
Exactly. Yeah.
you've got to have adaptability. You have to have as many tools in your toolkit that you can afford. And these are the biggest investments that you'll ever make.
Your
Your
hands, baby.
hands, these
Absolutely.
things, your ears, because you listen to your patient, you watch your patient, you feel your
Yes.
patient. But investing in the CCAT program is the biggest investment of the tool, which is you. You are the best tool
Yeah,
in your practice. And because you have got
absolutely.
to figure out which of the physical tools that you're going to need. So your biggest investment is in
Yeah.
yourself and your education.
I agree, and going back to every time that pet comes in for each of its
Mm,
different sessions, I've instilled in my therapists that every day or every session is
yeah.
a reevaluation. It's not
Hmm.
formal, but you are
Yep.
reevaluating that patient, whether it's progress or
Yep.
decline or static and neutral, things like that. But yeah, every day is going to be different.
Every,
So
yep.
every day is technically a reeval. It's just not
Yep.
your
You
formal.
have to
You know what I
feel
mean?
them. You
And
have
then
to just be like, "Hey, we're gonna acclimate to
yeah,
the treadmill. We're just gonna." And I start from the head, and I do a lot of manual therapy. I do a lot of manual therapy, big
yeah,
into body mechanics. I'm happy to set up land exercises and do everything. I have a wonderful support staff of assistants that do all of that for
yeah.
us. But I'm there to watch. I watch the mechanics so they can do the exercise, and I'm there to
Mm,
observe changes in mechanics and everything else. The same with the treadmill. They can run the treadmill and
yeah,
I watch them and I'm like, okay, let's speed it up, slow it down, let's give them a break, let's do this. But you have to get your hands on your patient every time they come in. As they start to weight bear better, as they start to improve, as their muscle mass starts to improve, there are going to be little tiny changes in like everywhere. You may not have changes up over the trapezius. So you may feel a little sideways shift and you're like, what's going on? And then you work your way back and you find a thumping great trigger point somewhere. And you're like, whoop, plans changed. We've got to treat this. Or the
yeah.
dog comes in with rippling myofascial tension all the way down its back. And you're like,
Oh, yeah.
plans changed.
I was just going to mention that you can have something as simple as a
Oh,
TPLO
all
coming
the
in,
time.
but their spine needs work. It's
My
crazy. Just to get some release out of their spine, you'll
Yes.
see such a
My
difference at
here are
that
my top
patient.
these pay attention, guys, because these are my top 3 tips for TPLOs. I'm not worried about the implant unless if the incision's healed, there's no heat, there's no swelling, and if I push on the plate and there's no pain, whoop-de-doo, we're good to go. Sartorius.
Yeah,
Mm. Check the sartorius, check the pectineus. Yep.
underrated muscle.
Underrated,
Underrated muscle.
so underrated. Anything, it's a whole don't
Yes.
get me started on is it an ilio because that's a whole podcast in itself. It's not, and we'll go yeah. So sartorius, pectineus, gastroc. Those are the 3 biggies.
Hmm.
Anytime you wanna release a little bit of tension in the gastroc because you imagine what they've done what's happened during TPLO, imagine I
Hmm.
always find concrete in the gastroc. So you're gonna slide always check to make sure that they don't mind having their feet touch first. Toe traction. little bit of
Yeah.
toe traction down round the back of the, like down on the toes, is going to release some of that tension in the gastroc, just like that. Okay, hang on just one second. I have to
Very cool.
remove my
Very
cat.
cool too.
Right.
This is Rock.
Hi, Rock.
Rock is a ginger pain in the ass. I love him to death, but he
Yeah.
like anytime I'm on a call, "Hey, what you doing?" And then it's like chocolate starfish across the. It's
Yeah.
terrible. It's terrible. So digit traction, like little tiny bit of digit traction loosens
Yeah.
that up. You like check the spine, check the pelvis. You check all those things, and boom, you've improved posture, weight bearing, biomechanics, joint kinematics, and off you go. But you don't do that and you're going to
Yeah.
struggle. You're going to have that. And they might not be ready for any of those things unless you take care of those base biomechanics first.
Yeah, I agree, and I do remember learning in my early stages. Obviously, yourself included, in our early stages, we have similar mindsets, but we're also just trying to get the patient in, trying to
Mm,
work the patient, and we miss some of our checkpoints. But again, this is how we learn, right?
absolutely.
And sometimes I've observed where therapy started right away with the patient came in and they just went
Yeah.
right to hydrotherapy. Now, hydrotherapy is great, and there are some thermal effects. Yes, loosen the dog up for you and get things going. But sometimes there wasn't that quick body check,
Yeah.
or did they watch the patient walk in? And that's huge, right? Because now they're in the underwater treadmill and they
Not
see,
right. Yeah.
they're a little limpy.
You're like, hmm,
Yeah. Like,
what's that?
what's
And
going
you're
on?
like, should have checked them
Yeah.
first.
Yeah, and instead of checking, then you see that, okay, we're changing parameters in the underwater treadmill to accommodate
Mm,
that limping. But at the end of the day, that's not, at least in my opinion, the correct
yeah.
protocol,
Always,
the right
always
thing to do.
evaluate first.
Just because they're in the underwater treadmill now, let's just change parameters a little bit to
Yeah.
accommodate the limp instead of seeing what you probably could have done with
Yeah.
your hands first and negated that limp
No,
altogether.
absolutely.
You
And
know?
I think we see it more, especially with new students. Way back in the way
Yeah.
back when I started rehab, I'm not even going to mention how long ago that was. You're so hyper vigilant and you're like, oh God, is that
Mm,
right? Is that right? And when I learned, there really
yeah.
wasn't,
The
yeah, the
overthinking.
overthinking and then doing things so incrementally slowly that you really weren't hoping the pet in the first place. But
Or being
yes,
too
and
rigid.
it's I think rehab, even just with hydrotherapy as a whole, I think rehab in general is a lifelong learning experience. From the time that I
Mm,
graduated to now, the amount that I have learned, I'm eternally grateful for everybody who's taken the time to teach me, tell me a tidbit, show me something. But I think we need to have that as a community. And I think that's what our CCAT program is so helpful about is you've got access to us as instructors. You've got the
yes.
forum. You're like, "Hey, I've got an idea. Hey, I've got this case." And we're there. We may not be on the end of the
Yeah,
phone, but we're there. We're accessible. So we're there for our
absolutely.
graduates. If they say, "Hey,
Yes.
I've got this case. I've got this video. Can I just get your eyes on this video?" And we're like, Yeah, you might want to tweak this, tweak that. Have you tried this?" So it's not a case of, "Oh, you've graduated. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your dosh. We're off." She got that access to lifelong learning and
Yeah. I
mm,
think that's huge. Obviously, you want that as a
mm,
current student. I think that gives you a sense of security as an
mhm,
alumni too, that you continue to learn when you leave that
mhm,
certification program, but there's still a community, there's still somebody
mhm,
to ask
mhm.
for help because I think that's important as a therapist, having that mindset of even though you graduated and you're out there, you're starting your own thing or working for somebody, the mindset of still and always asking for help instead of thinking like, this is my patient, I got to do it myself. And everything I've learned, I'm just going to
Yeah.
try and applicate. It might not work. It might work in the long run. It might not work
Yeah,
out,
and
you
I
know?
think that's with the CCAT program and the hands-on lab. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of investment hours. It's a lot of lab hours. We break it down into we'll have a chat about the physics of whatever modality we're using. I usually do a lot of the hydro labs. We'll take time to talk about the various bits of the treadmill. And I think one thing that people don't realize is the maintenance.
Yeah.
Huge.
Huge.
You don't this is not a leave it and
I
forget it
I
type
am
yeah, this
guilty
is
of
not
that.
a leave it and forget it type of
When I
thing.
yeah.
So,
When I first started with all of that, I was like, "Oh my god,
you
this is
it
another
is.
part-time
You
job
have
there."
to factor in your treadmill maintenance, but you have to
Yeah.
test your water in the morning and in the evening. Heavy use in the
Mhm.
treadmill is gonna drop your chlorine, you need to be aware of that. So you put your water in and it starts to
Absolutely.
look like pond water, then we're in trouble. You've got coat oils,
Yeah.
you've got dirt, you've got God knows what, especially in those long coated
Oh,
dogs. And you start to fill the water
those certain breeds
and
are
like this whole
yeah.
you're like, "Where oh, we took him for a walk in the woods before we brought him here." And of course you're like,
Not to single out a certain breed, new ones in
"Oh."
my facility are ter my water.
So
I cringe. I cringe, I let it happen. Okay, okay.
but
Well,
you
this
have
is
to have
okay.
a
We'll
protocol in
fix it.
place.
We'll fix it.
We have something called a gravity drain. So if we get something that comes in the water and you always and it's also the aesthetic. If you were a new client coming in and someone filled your treadmill and it came out looking like
Absolutely.
sewage water, I'd be like, "No,
Murky, yeah,
I like my water to be nice, like
yeah,
clear, a little fuzzy depending on the."
absolutely,
And I'll always explain to the owner as the water fills, if it looks murky, I'm like, "We've just had a couple of busy clients and
yeah.
check our chemicals."
Always important. Communication,
Absolutely.
education,
But
always
we have
important.
something called a gravity drain. If something comes up and it looks really grody,
Mm,
we won't put it back in the tank. We just open the floor drain, flush it out, and refill the tank as we're going.
yes.
You've got to factor that in. Maintenance, cleaning, culturing. Oh, tell me about it. Like you have to, we culture
Yeah.
every quarter. So you do your sanitization, which can take 2 to 4 hours
Mhm.
depending on what you're doing and how many treadmills you have.
Oh, yeah.
And then you
Yep.
culture, and then you send it out for an environmental culture and sensitivity. You do not want to see nasty things growing in your treadmill because you're putting
No.
patients with compromised immune systems. You do
Yeah,
not want that. You do not want so the upkeep of these things is so important. It's not just a one of these things that you can
absolutely.
just put in and then forget about it. There's a lot of extra man hours in put into to keep these things running appropriately.
It's definitely not your
Nope.
infomercial,
Mm-mm.
set it and forget it,
Mm-mm.
that's for
No,
sure.
you've got to have people that
Yeah,
know and understand how to maintain it. And for us, it's a whole crew thing. We don't just have one person
yeah,
that's responsible for keeping the treadmill because if they go out sick or if they go on vacation, everyone's like scratching their head going,
yeah.
who did this? We have spreadsheets up the wazoo for our susceptibilities, our chemicals, our temperatures, and everything else. And it's
Oh,
all on
yeah.
a big Excel spreadsheet that we keep online. It's really important to make sure your equipment is as effective as you are. And if you are efficient, your equipment will be efficient too.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people to know about the maintenance because even though we have a semi-annual tech coming out to do their version of maintenance, we have set parameters in a number of weeks where we're doing our
Yeah.
own
Mhm.
maintenance as well. Not just the water, but just the
Mhm.
overall actual maintenance of looking at your treadmill, running it, listening for certain
Mhm.
things, those kind of things, because you don't want to leave it to just every 6 months, right? Before it back to do some sort of maintenance. I'm no, I'm not talking water here. Believe me, I'm not talking water here. Water should never wait 6 months. But I'm talking about the overall mechanics of
Mhm.
the treadmill itself. Even though it's brand new, there's something could be in there. Food, anything. Listen,
Treat
even
it
look
like a Ferrari.
around. Yeah, because
I
almost as
know,
much.
it's
I
a
mean, it's a
huge
down.
it's a
It's maybe
huge
half.
investment and
Yeah. You put a
yeah,
car in.
you do,
Let's
and
let's
it
be
requires
honest.
it has engines, it has moving parts, it has things that
Yeah,
require regular maintenance, just like your car needs to go in for maintenance. And it should that
absolutely,
no different, and it's really important because it really
absolutely.
does affect you do not want to be that person that has to call the last 2 weeks worth of appointments because you cultured
Mm,
something very ugly in
mhm.
your treadmill. Yeah.
I agree.
Mm,
I agree.
fun.
That is, if anybody learns anything, is
It'll
this
be
segment right
learn the
there
hard
for sure.
way, learn the hard way, and
Yeah.
you do not
Unfortunately, some people
mm,
have to, but hopefully if they listen to
prevention
this,
is
they
better
won't
than cure.
have to. It's so
It
correct.
goes with poop
So
too.
correct. Um,
Prevention is
Oh my
better
God.
than cure.
That was the other thing when you brought up your gravity train, that's the other thing that's super
Yes.
important too. You need that gravity drain
Yes.
for that. It's
Don't
don't let it go
no.
back into the tank.
Don't
I know you, even if it happens in the morning, don't try to
no,
skim it
no,
and say,
no,
okay, good enough.
no. I've
No.
had that once
No.
that a
Yeah.
therapist that I worked with at another facility, I was away and something pooped in the treadmill and she pushed drain and then proceeded to use the second treadmill for the rest of the day. So I came back and I was
Okay.
like, there was a sign
Okay.
on the door that said, "Oops, poop." And I was like, "What?"
Oh no.
And yeah, we had to clean
Yeah.
like everything. We lost an entire day of work because I had to drop, clean, and I had to
Oh yeah.
get in the holding tank and scrub it out. Getting in that and getting out of that is not fun.
Yes. I know. I unfortunately or fortunately am too big to get inside, but I do have staff. I do have staff that
Like
are
small enough to get in the hole. Yeah.
probably perfect size.
Nobody wants to go in the hole, so
And
prevention is better than cure.
and just make sure, depending on how your holding tank is set up, even on the inside, just make sure somebody's around so that maybe
Yes,
you don't get stuck in
yes,
there
because they'll
either.
be like, "Has anybody seen Kirsty?" And
Make
then
sure
there's
you know
like
you
this like knocking.
yeah,
Where's that knocking?
know your exits, have a buddy
Yes,
system.
yes.
Yeah. But yeah, so those are lessons you don't want to learn the hard way because yeah, some might not be fortunate enough to have a
Yes.
second treadmill. So you don't want to shut down
Mhm,
for the rest of the day in
mhm.
that sense because you and your staff are all hands on deck
Yeah.
because of what just happened. Of
Code
the code
brown is
brown.
the
Absolutely. Absolutely. But so, Kirsty, what would you say you're seeing as maybe like future trends in education and hydrotherapy? What are some new stuff that you might be seeing that's coming out there?
Wow, good question. I think education
Yeah, as we're
always
evolving,
evolving,
right?
and I think it should be always evolving. I think the base model of any treadmill is I think they've got all of
Mhm.
everything worked out. It'd be interesting to see with the advent of more kind of like, I don't know if you're in the AI camp or in the non-AI camp. And I think some of it is like super cool that how exciting it would be to implement some of that in our veterinary rehab kind of thing, but how
Yeah,
frightening that can be and how lazy that might make us. It I feel
yeah,
like it's a knife edge as to which way that might go, that I
I
still
absolutely
think
agree.
any AI is gonna not be as good as what you've got attached to your body. But
So,
education, just education. Everybody we all see different cases. You see a fun case, you see something, you've done something
mm,
cool that you've never done before, let somebody know because that might be the one link that they need to make that case that they have a little bit
yeah,
better. So I think sharing, educating, don't be a
yeah.
rehab miser. Don't hold on to everything, be like, you can't have that, it's mine. Hiss and go away.
My little,
Be part. It's funny, my boss back at Red Bank, Tony DiCarlo, he always used to
mm,
say, "Don't come to me with a problem, come to me with a solution." And I
my
always
facility.
thought I was like,
Absolutely.
"Duh, if I had the solution, I wouldn't have a problem." But it's surprising how true that
Yeah.
is. Don't whine about the problem, be part of the solution of how do we bring
Yeah.
these
And
things forward.
I, I think it's a great mindset. And I do think as a business owner, my mindset has changed tremendously. But as an employee, I feel like you don't always get those leaders as whether it's a manager, director, or even an owner that try to basically empower
Mhm,
you to, yes, there's a problem. And okay, I'm here to help you, but what is the solution? So what solution did you come
mhm,
up with? And I think the mindset is lost that as an employee, and I used to be there, just like you said, we have a problem. This is your facility, this is your equipment. So we expect them to have the solution, the leader or the boss or the director manager. And in hindsight, it's they're trying to empower
mhm,
you as well as help you. So yes, come with a solution. And it might be the absolutely perfect solution, the right solution that we should go with. And if not, I tell my staff, this was a good thought process, but
yeah,
let's tinker here because now we're working
yes,
together, right? It's
mhm,
instead of I'm trying to elevate you, right? I'm not trying to trickle it down to you. I'm actually
yep,
trying to trickle it up,
mhm,
right? So, what was your solution? What did you see that? What was the best outcome for that
mhm,
problem? And it might not have been the best, or it might have. And for me, I'll either say, great job, thank you so much, or I'll say, about half of that is pretty helpful. But if we go this route, I think we can
Yeah.
fully get that outcome that you're looking for,
Mhm.
I'm looking for,
I
things
think
like
it
I think
also
that's super
opens
huge.
up dialogue. If you have somebody that's walking
Yeah.
around going, "Da, da, 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 I have a problem, I have a problem," people step away from that because they don't want that.
Yeah.
But if you say, "Hey, let's have a sit down, let's brainstorm," and then all of a sudden someone says, "Oh, have we
Yeah.
tried this?" And you're like, "Holy crap, there it is." And open up that dialogue because many minds make light work. Make it a hive mind, think as a group and say, "Hey,
Yeah.
I'm seeing this. Do you see that?"
Yeah. No, I agree. I think there's more
Yeah.
enlightenment in that than just I'm the lesser,
Yeah.
you're the higher, and you give me the answer and I'll just execute. I don't think that's
Yeah.
very drone, and I don't like it in a work environment for sure. But yeah, so that I totally agree with your AI comment before too, because I think it's great that there's AI out there that can help with diagnostics because it can also keep us on the right path or lead us to a different
Mhm.
path. But yeah, it's tricky, man, because then w- where is the
Mhm.
practitioner in the sense? Is it the AI and now we're just the peons?
Skynet is
In that sense, I know exactly. It's true though. And then as soon as the robots come around, then the AI is just going to tell the robot. But with those advancements, and with any advancements in tech, there's always these super pluses. But yeah, beware of those
Mhm.
super minuses. But yeah, those advancements in equipment in general too, which would be really fun to see in underwater treadmills, just the AI reading, like I said, that, okay, this dog's been doing great, but now all of a sudden it has a
Mm.
slight limp. And maybe there's something in the water that the AI can feel that there's, and it'll just do a little pop up. Hey, check your
Yeah.
patient.
Mhm.
Something like that would be really cool. Now, again, we should be having our eyes
Mhm.
on the patient. Theory versus
Yeah.
practice,
Yeah,
even though it's
absolutely. Every new
parallel.
tech always has bugs, and I think there are super smart people that work it's their
Yeah.
responsibility to work all the bugs out. But you
Yeah.
still have your baseline principles. You still have your treadmill, you still
Yeah.
have your patient. So I think the biggest I think if the biggest advancement to anybody is always education. It doesn't matter if
Yeah.
it's like an online class that was given 10 years ago. It's something that you as a person haven't
Yeah.
seen. So that's information and education that you have now got access to. All of the tech and all of this stuff and all of the whiz bangs are great, but education is ever evolving and is should always be forefront.
Absolutely. And I do think a good point or a good segue from there too is that I'm a product of being in sports and being on teams and things like that. But don't forget your
Mhm.
fundamentals.
Mhm.
Revamp them. Don't ever think you always know.
Mhm.
Because, like you said, there's a video from 10 years ago that could be going over just
Yeah.
foundational stuff and
Basic.
fundamentals. And you might be like, oh, yeah, you know what? That's totally
Yeah.
slipped my mind. And it was something
Yeah.
fundamental,
Yeah.
baseline. And I think it's truly you recycle.
Yes.
Make sure you
It's
recycle,
so easy to think about like advancement and how I can make this stronger and better and what can I do to this? It's a challenge. It's a challenge. And you're like, we forget that you walk before you run.
Yeah.
And if you ain't walking, you
Yeah.
ain't running.
Absolutely.
So you don't
This is true.
forget your baseline principles, your base.
This
Yeah.
is true.
So how do we fit that into a rehab setting? How do we the run
Yeah.
before you walk? You have to be able to stand before you can walk. You have to be able to sit
Correct.
before you can stand. All of these
Mhm.
things, if any animal doesn't have that basic fundamental of being able to sit up into a sternal position, don't think they're going to walk in the underwater treadmill. Take your
Right.
bed. But it's that it can be that complicated and it can be that easy.
Absolutely. And I do think sometimes going back to that new rehab mindset is don't
Yeah.
overthink it, man. Just remember your fundamentals,
Yeah.
start from there, and yeah, use the
And
tools you have in
listen
front of
to
you,
your
right? So
client. What your goals
yes.
are great. Your clinical goals of you're like, oh, I want this dog to have 60 centimeters of muscle mass in 3 months. It's awesome. And your owner
Right.
is couch potato. So whose goals are
Yeah.
you going to get to? You have to listen to your clients Your dogs have jobs. You start talking about working dogs and the athletes, and that's a whole separate level. But what is the function
Oh,
of
yeah.
your average pet in that pet parent family? Does it go hiking with the kids? Does it roll off the
Yeah.
couch, go out, pee, poop, and come back in? Because all of those are going to affect your rehab
Mm.
goals. So listen to your listen to your clients. Please listen to your clients.
Yes. Listen to your clients. Stay out of
Yes,
cookie cutters. Everybody's different. Every patient's different. Every goal is
absolutely. It's all different.
Oh man. This has been an amazing
Oh, I'm
talk,
so glad.
Kirsty. I truly appreciate you coming on. It was very insightful, at least for me. I'm hoping our listeners got a little
I hope
tidbit as
so. Other
well.
than the fact that the Brit is
And
crazy.
w- ref- I'm going to stay neutral there.
Hey,
Um,
listen, we're still annoyed that you pushed all that tea into Boston Harbor. That is integrated into us through generations now.
I get it. I get it. I get it. I won't elaborate into it, but I get it. But Kirsty, we're definitely going to have
I
you
would
on
love to.
again. This was truly educational, inspiring, and a little entertaining too.
Hey, listen,
So,
education is not boring.
yeah, listen, that's our goal here with these podcasts. We want
Yes.
edutainment. We want you to learn something and also be a little entertained as
Thank
well.
you so
For
much for
sure.
having me.
But thanks again, Kirsty. And yeah,
Thank
we'll
you
see
so
you
much for
soon.
having me. And thanks everybody for listening. Thank you.
Of course.
You've been listening to the Canine Rehab Movement Podcast. Thank you for tuning in. And for more information about our programs, please visit ncsuvetce.com. That's ncsuvetce.com. And for those of you who've made it to the end of the podcast, use the discount code NCSU100 and save $100 off of any course, $4.99 or more. Until next time, guys, this is the Canine Rehab Movement Podcast.